Heathenry, Norse pagan history and modern practices. We will discuss Norse paganism, including the history of the Norse people and ways to practice today. Let's discuss the history of the Norse and their religions. Who were the Norsemen? What are Vikings? What was life like then? How did the average person interact with the gods and other entities? We will discuss what little we know about the history, life, and religions of the Norse people. When I say Norse or Norsemen, I am referring to the old Scandinavian and Germanic peoples. The most common era in history that is associated with the Norse is the Viking Age. 793 to 1066 AD is defined as the period when the Norsemen, known as Vikings, undertook large-scale raiding, colonizing, conquest, and trading throughout Europe and reached North America. Norse, Norseman, Viking, heathen. These words are often used interchangeably, but they don't all mean the same thing. Norse literally means north, so the Norse are the people of the north, and Norsemen are Northmen. Viking literally means raider. They would go Viking, meaning they would go on raids. This was not the name of the people, but the activity of raiding and conquest. Other people referred to them as Vikings to identify them as a threat. To call someone a Viking would be like calling someone a criminal. The people who settled most of Scandinavia and Germany at the time didn't label themselves as Norse or Viking. They were just the people, and everyone else were other people. Heathen was a word for country folk. It only gained religious meaning in the modern day. This was a very different time. Life was difficult, especially in the harsh northern climates. Society was divided into a three-tier social structure of enslaved people, peasants, and elites. The Norse were not a united people. Common rulers were military warlords called drottning, who were selected from warriors based on merit and only in power during wartime, and subject to assassination if they gained too much power. In peacetime, there were kings, selected from the elite class, and they traveled throughout the region and met people in halls built in part for that purpose. These kings often lost power to regicide. Most provinces were largely autonomous of the kings and self-sustaining. The Norse did not have many holy buildings separate from other structures, like churches. Instead, the central gathering place of many villages was a great feasting hall. This was a common place of worship, but also for government and the community. When living in a relatively lawless society, the common ethic of the times were also different. Going Viking was not a major part of everyday life, but it was seen as an honorable endeavor if it brought wealth back to the family. Strength was required to keep what you had, and family and community ties were highly valued, as they provided greater strength and safety. A common perspective: if I harm someone, my family may be harmed in retribution. And if I am harmed, I know my family will take revenge. Fear of retribution governed most activities, and laws were only as effective as their enforcement. It was acceptable for a family to demand payment or other compensation when wronged, to prevent continual feuding. And once the compensation was accepted, the matter was closed. This could include compensation if someone were killed. The Norse people were a seafaring culture, relying on fish and trade as much as hunting and farming. In fact, it would be very difficult for them to survive without bringing in outside resources. This need drove them to explore and settle many places. When the Norsemen found another culture, they would exchange goods. When trading was not possible, that's when they would go Viking and raid other settlements. The Norse first settled Greenland in the 980s. From Greenland, they sailed west and found North America, calling it Vinland. There are accounts of trade with the native peoples. This picture is Leif Erikson traveling to North America by Norwegian nationalist painter Christian Krogh. Norsemen sailed around Spain into the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. They also had at times trade routes reaching into the Middle East. Ancient Norse religion. What little we know about the ancient lore and religious practices of the Norse people has survived in stories written down much later by scholars and poets during the early Christian era, and accounts from outside groups like the Romans. Some aspects of the Norse religion and myth are very old, but they did not exist in isolation. Beliefs and myths were shared and blended with other cultures they came into contact with, including the Celts, Romans, and even the Arabs. To learn some things about ancient practices, we can look to the language. Ve means a sacred place. Some accounts describe sacred groves. Vigja means to bless. There are stories of Thor blessing with his hammer Mjolnir. A bloat is an act of sacrifice or worship. The act of giving sacrifice is blota, and something given in sacrifice is bloti. Commonly, these sacrifices were made as transactional offerings. These usually included an animal offering in exchange for some kind of boon. Horger was a pile of stones used for sacrifice. The number 9 was a very sacred number. Accounts of temples, called Hof, only came later, in texts from Christian sources describing the Norse. Symbol were ritual feasts with both religious and communal purposes, often including boasting and swearing oaths. Accounts of prayers are very few. Seder means a custom or religious practice or magical practice. The practice of Seder is believed to be a form of magic, which is related to both the telling and shaping of the future. Practitioners of Seder, primarily women called vulva, may have been religious leaders of the Viking community. Many of the myths are sometimes seemingly contradictory. These myths came from stories that changed and shifted from one teller to the next, and from one place to the next. A skald was a kind of bardic storyteller and historian. What little we know about the gods come from these myths, stories shared orally, and differently in different places and times. Different regions honored different gods, or honored gods in different ways. The gods best known today are Thor, Loki, and Odin, thanks in no small part to our modern media. Let's bust the myth that the Norse gods represented function, like Thor as the god of thunder and Odin as the god of war. They were not really the gods of anything. just gods. Many of the gods in the Norse pantheon did have their specializations, and many of them also share abilities. They are complex and flawed characters, not simple archetypes. Odin was the sorcerer, the poet, the inspiration of kings, the protector of outcasts, a seducer and a trickster. Thor, like his comic book character, was also thought of as a hero, the defender of the common man and friend of humans. He was strength and violence, war and prosperity, the strongest of the gods hitting with the might of a lightning strike. He is joyful and friendly, brave and proud, but also quick to temper, gullible and naive. Loki was both a valued ally and an adversary at times. Yggdrasil, the world tree, was the central aspect of their concept of the cosmos. It was the central pillar holding together the universe, connecting the 9 worlds. We exist on Midgard, and the gods on Asgard. The gods were seen as greatly powerful, but they lived in Asgard, in another world. People didn't pray to the gods all the time. It's more common for people in their everyday life to interact with all the other kinds of beings, invisible neighbors in the world around them. They believed in many beings, creatures, and spirits of the land, like elves, trolls, the undead, and many kinds of natural spirits and regional guardians. For some, offerings were made. For others, places avoided. These beings could be helpful or harmful, and are much like the Fae we are familiar with in fairy tales and folklore. The ancestors. It was very important to be close to the family and the honored dead. Not everyone got a grave. Only important people, worth remembering like heroes. Female ancestral protectors were sometimes known as Disir. Your luck was a product of your ancestors' deeds, like ancestral karma. Ancestors could be called upon to help improve this luck. Let's bust another myth. The myth is all Viking warriors who died in battle went to Odin's Hall, Valhalla. The truth is, only the very best warriors were selected for this afterlife. And first, Freya gets to take her half of the fallen warriors to her hall. Only then the remainder go to Odin's Hall, Valhalla. Unlike popular portrayal in later poetry and sagas, the Valkyries were not beautiful, angelic figures who swooped in to collect the fallen warriors. The Valkyries were personifications of war, unleashed upon the battlefield. They had name meanings like sword time, spear noise, and other names of terror, death, and the loud noises of battle. Valkyries are also described as Odin's Disir. The majority of people, men and women, go to Hel's Hall in their afterlife. This was not a terrible place, more of a continuation of life. But those who were lost at sea were taken by the goddess Ran, dragged down by her fishing net. The Norse concept of the soul has multiple parts. Part of the soul moves on to the afterlife. Part of the soul could be reincarnated, usually within the family line. That was the overview of the Norse pagan history. Let's explore what it means to be a heathen today. and look at the various forms of paganism related to the Norse religion, from northern traditional paganism, Norse Reconstructionism, asatru, and eclectic paganism. We will talk about some topics of controversy like folkism and UPG. Defining the terms. Norse pagan, asatru, and heathen can at times all mean the same thing, and they can each refer to the same person. Asatru is a religious title created in modern day for the religion of the people with faith in the Aesir. The problem is that this only refers to the faith of a subset of the gods. Response titles have been created like Vanatru, Rokatru, Lokian, Jotanatru, and Thorsatru. Another problem with the title Asatru is the word is associated with the Asatru Folk Assembly, the AFA, a group that has taken a very racist approach to the faith. In order to avoid being associated with them, many have moved away from using this title. Norse pagan is a term to identify others as part of the pagan community, practicing the Norse form of their spirituality. Those who use the term Norse pagan tend to practice a more eclectic form of paganism, more akin to Wicca than the historic approach of Reconstructionists. Northern traditional paganism is a more generic way of saying Norse paganism. Heathen comes from a Germanic word for country dweller, similar to the word pagan. It was used by early Christians to identify the Norse people. Those who use the term heathen tend to practice a more historic approach of Reconstructionists than eclectic paganism. Your hearth cult is a term for the personal approach to the faith in their household, often with a selection of specific gods. Folkism. Are all folkists racist? Folkism is the belief that ancestral ties give benefit, privilege, or access to a religious tradition, especially in lieu of a living culture. Folkism is racist when it equates ancestral ties in lieu of a living culture to race and genetics. Folkism in heathenry is the idea that the religion is centered around an ancestral connection, and the celebration of that ancestral connection is only possible if you have the right ancestors. This idea is the cornerstone of the racist heathen groups like the Asatru Folk Assembly, AFA. In response to the greater heathen and pagan community, the greater heathen and pagan community created Declaration 127. Quote, "When you see misdeeds, speak out against them, and give your enemies no frith." Have 'em all. 127. The AFA's views do not represent our community. We hereby declare that we do not condone hatred or discrimination carried out in the name of our religion, and will no longer associate with those who do. We will not grant the tacit approval of silence in the name of frith. To those who would use our traditions to justify prejudice on the basis of race, nationality, orientation, or gender identity, the AFA is free to stand for whatever principle it sees fit. They are free to stand alone." End quote. That's a major part of Declaration 127. Groups that openly support Declaration 127 and register and be listed on their website. This is a good place to look for organizations while you are considering affiliation. If they're not listed, you should probably ask further questions. Finding balance. Reconstructionism and eclectic paganism. Reconstructionism attempts to construct a faith based on historic evidence. For heathenry, it is very difficult to get a complete picture of how the Norse religious practices were conducted. Very little knowledge is complete, and some aspects may never be known. Eclecticism is a personalized faith based on personal experiences, often blending different faiths. It's the take what you like and leave the rest method. There are clear benefits and drawbacks to both approaches, and I find the best approach is to find a balance of using both types, is to form a balance to make a more complete picture. Personal gnosis. Faith includes personal experiences and understanding, commonly called personal gnosis. UPG, unverified personal gnosis, is any non-transferable personal experience, sometimes referring to divinely revealed knowledge. UPG is true for that person, but not necessarily true for everyone. SPG, shared personal gnosis. When UPG is shared and agreed upon, SPG is not necessarily true, but it is more likely to be. VPG, verified personal gnosis. VPG in polytheistic cases usually refers to SPG that is supported by historical examples or evidence. VPG is also not necessarily true, but even more so likely. Multiple historic accounts can often contradict each other. In conclusion, gnosis, or religious knowledge, or truth, is hard to know. Not all UPG are messages from the gods, and even if they are, gods can lie. It may be a message for you, and not necessarily an absolute truth for everyone. Examples of various personal gnosis in heathenry: that Freya likes chocolate and or strawberries. Thor likes coffee, especially strong coffee. And Odin likes whiskey. Sandalwood incense is pleasing to most of the gods. The cats that pull Freya's chariot are named Beigel and Tregel. This is the only way we can learn the names and characteristics of little-known gods and spirits. Personal gnosis can also include how you worship. You will learn how to communicate with the gods, how to make a proper sacrifice, and who you feel the greatest connection with. This is personal gnosis. Developing your own hearth cult. Ask questions. Listen and learn. Be willing to change your views. Read, and read some more. Develop personal relationships. Be careful of joining groups. Consider developing relationships with ancestors, spirits, and your invisible neighbors, the gods. Meditate, be mindful, and pay attention. And start journaling. just writing things down is a great way to get started. That was an overview of heathenry and modern practices. Continue learning. I have a long list of the sources that I've pulled on and used to learn the things that I've shared today, including authors Jackson Crawford, Neil Gaiman, Galina Kraskova, Patricia M. Lefebvre, Daniel McCoy, Stephen Pullington, Ryan Smith, and Ben Wagner. I also found a lot of content on YouTube from creators Ocean Keltoy, Arith Hardner, Jackson Crawford, and some from the Grimfrost Academy. Websites I pulled from: Declaration 127, Norse Mythology for Smart People, ThoughtCo, and Nordic Culture. Please share your own personal gnosis, questions, or anything else. We'll try to answer, or we can find the answers together. Thank you.